President. This should have been an opportunity to identify and discuss in a consensual way reforms that might have helped to genuinely enhance Victorian firefighting well into the 21st century. In turn, a bipartisan path could have also been taken to agreeing on the very best model of a presumptive compensation scheme for all Victorian firefighters, regardless of their background or status in the fire. Instead, like a lot of other people, I see this as merely the latest chapter in a story about fire management in Victoria that has become political, acrimonious, and at times frustrating. Unfortunately, in the process, not everyone's best interests have been served. Least of all, millions of normal everyday Victorians who, living as many of them do in some of the most fire-prone regions in the world, truly deserve the best organised and best functioning fire service imaginable. Let me move to a more positive note, though, to express my considerable gratitude to all of the many people who have contacted me about this legislation. I have been absolutely overwhelmed in a good way by the volume of that contact and the sincerity and passion with which people have made their views known to me. The vast majority of those people have been opposed to the bill. However, that certainly hasn't meant that I have paid any less attention or regard to any of my meetings with or any of the phone calls, emails and letters that have come from people supporting the legislation. I thank everyone concerned, regardless of the side of the debate from which they have come, and even though my vote on the bill will inevitably displease some of them. In the interests of full disclosure, I should also make it known at this point that I am, and have been for a long time, a proud CFA volunteer. Complementing the very detailed correspondence and advice I have received, that background gives me a level of personal, practical familiarity with the issues and competing perspectives about this legislation. That said, I also want to be very clear here that I respect every firefighter in the state, irrespective of whether it is their career or they are a volunteer or a member of a union or not. The hard work and dedication all of them bring to the task of fighting fires, responding to other emergencies and selflessly protecting the lives of others is something for which every Victorian should be eternally grateful. Nevertheless, the arrival of this bill in the chamber forces us to make a very unpleasant choice. Rightly or wrongly, the picture here is one of us essentially being asked to take sides in an argument where the interests of paid staff and firefighters are being pitted against the interests of volunteers. That being the basic position in which we find ourselves, I will be opposing this bill. Because I not only dislike the fact that such divisions between people are being fostered, but also because even after the torturous history that has led to the creation of this bill, it is still not clear to me in a practical sense how these proposed changes, if passed, would improve community safety or enhance fire service arrangements or delivery, administratively, operationally, financially or culturally. As far as presumptive compensation is specifically concerned, I have no problem with the concept of any government trying to institute an improved model for claims from firefighters suffering from cancer. Indeed, I totally support that idea in principle. However, when it comes to the bill before us today, I do not like the specifics in it in relation to presumptive compensation. I understand the government's thinking on this from an administrative perspective, from briefings they have generously given their time to me. But I still particularly dislike the proposition that two distinct classes of firefighters will be created for this purpose, and that very different approaches will be applied to different people, even if they have fought exactly the same fires at exactly the same times. In short, it is my view that there should not be a completely different claims process for volunteers from the one for career firefighters. The treatment of the criteria, the treatment of and criteria for those claims should not be significantly more exacting for the first of those two groups. It should be fundamentally equal. In my own case, I have attended fires where I've been among groups of volunteers standing outside burning sheds and feeding hoses to firefighters inside the buildings who were all wearing BA, which is breathing apparatus. Those of us outside were wearing only a small dust mask, so I ask you, who was facing the greatest danger of inhaling dangerous, potentially cancer-causing chemicals? The volunteers. Like many others, I am also disappointed there has not been a separation of the two very distinct and different aspects of the bill, the presumptive compensation facet and the component related to administrative restructuring. These things are not intrinsically linked, and they should be split in order to enable standalone examination of each of those sets of issues individually. And indeed, if I do turn now to the parts of the bill that are concerned with the administrative restructuring of the state's fire services, I am equally unconvinced of the merits of those proposed changes. I will certainly grant anyone who cares to argue the point that the CFA model and the way in which it both complements and integrates with the MFB's operations is largely unique. Yet I would say that, in many ways, that it's essential and until now enduring strength. As a big part of that, it is worth stressing that the CFA model has served this state exceptionally well from the moment the organisation in its current form was established more than 70 years ago. And this is one of the many reasons that I do not subscribe to the government's proposed restructure, especially when there has not, in my view, been enough detail or explanation offered publicly of how the overhaul will work at a practical operational level. To the best of my knowledge, there has also never been a recommendation from any serious expert or inquiry that the CFA should be separated into discrete parts, with a staff service on one hand and a full volunteer service on the other. Of course, one of the things that we do know is that if the dismantling of the existing integrated CFA model were to occur in the manner the government has outlined, then it would be a huge challenge to prevent further divisions, both structurally and culturally, opening between paid staff and volunteers. There are also a range of unanswered questions about how individual fires would specifically be fought under the proposed new arrangements and by whom. I also want to raise another concern that has been cited to me repeatedly, and that is there hasn't been adequate consultation on the changes with a range of critical stakeholders, including volunteer firefighters themselves. That it is an even more worrying development when, in this case, there are clear statutory obligations requiring that such consultation occur. Wider consultation on the bill would also have likely led to a better public understanding, not just of the operational consequences, but also the multitude of financial implications of the proposed restructuring. And in this, I include the $131 million increase in the fire services levy over 4 years and the accompanying possibility of growth in the state's wages bills. The CFA's annual report reveals that firefighters' wages increased by $24 million in the last financial year alone due to pay rises, extra allowances and increased staffing levels. So by how much are we to imagine they might increase when brigades are likely comprised of a far larger proportion of paid firefighters in the years ahead? I could delve into much further detail on these points, and indeed I possibly will if there is sufficient time in the committee of the whole stage. And of course, people don't have to take my word for any of the concerns I am airing today. They can take the word of many expert voices in the field instead, such as voices like the numerous senior fire officials and leaders in the state who have resigned and or been forced from their positions in the course of recent years, as well as a number of very good Labor people themselves. At an organisational level, groups such as the Victorian Fire Brigades Association and Volunteer Fire Brigades Victoria have also warned consistently that the continued pursuit of changes of this kind would give rise to many problems, including serious interpersonal conflicts inside stations and brigades, and consequently a substantial loss of morale amongst volunteers. There have in fact already been countless anecdotes of the bullying and intimidation of volunteers, and we have seen an exodus of around 3,500 volunteers since the government first gave voice a few years ago to the prospects of such change. As much as any other factor, that should cause people supporting this legislation to perhaps hit the pause button. Notwithstanding that volunteer morale is probably already at an all-time low, I have little doubt this will decline even further if the changes are implemented. Quite obviously, we should be very hesitant about doing anything that prompts that to occur. Indeed, I have received many heartfelt messages from volunteers, including many second, third and fourth generation CFA families who say they will have no choice but to immediately join the exodus if the bill is passed. I don't by any means think the worst of anyone in this debate, and I do genuinely take government members in this Parliament at face value in their statements that they want the most modern firefighting service for Victoria. As far as I know, I don't think anyone opposes change in itself, and there are quite legitimate arguments for modifications to some elements of firefighting in Victoria. But this bill is not the right way forward, in my view, and many of my constituents. In fact, it is my fear it will lead us in the complete opposite direction. As numerous recent reviews and inquiries have concluded, the volunteer base offers notable strength to Victorian firefighting efforts, not least through its surge capacity, its members, local knowledge and the rapid speed with which it is typically able to respond to call-outs for help. In fact, it is worth adding that the Royal Commission's final report explicitly expressed support for the viability and continuation of the CFA integrated surface delivery model. More broadly, the Commission also observed, as other inquiries and reviews have done, that the shared responsibility inherent in the current model significantly enhances the state emergencies response and capacity. I will close, Acting President, by saying that each of us in this place should not lose sight of our most basic responsibilities in a debate such as this one. These are to ensure that we are taking the right steps to best protect Victorians' lives and to best minimise the likelihood and impact upon them of future fires and other emergencies. At the end of the day, these are the things which we must be bearing closest and clearest in our minds. They are therefore at the heart of the reason that I oppose this legislation and why I cannot, in all good conscience, support it.
Thank you, Ms.